Secondly, I don't see anyone here from high tech. Is anyone here? At any rate, there is a model American type home, which is down the block. And those who are interested in buying a home in Israel and living in a frat are welcome to see a model home. I imagine that there will be people there. Did they say something about that?
There are people, yeah. There are people there. There were people there.
So there are people there, so those who are interested, they sold you a house. Also. So those who are interested, I can tell you, well, how many of you are here from America? Who are still living in America or North America? Everyone is living in Israel. Those, that's wonderful. Those who still are unfortunately living in America or Canada, first of all, I feel sorry for you. And secondly, I urge you to live in a frat, and we have wonderful homes for you here. If you don't live in a frat, at least live someplace in Eretz Israel. Mr. Graven, we won't let you go home. You're home already. You're home now, Mr. Graven. You gotta stay. This morning, we attempted to deal with the question of Jew and Arab from a halachic perspective, and specifically the issue of Jew and Arab. This afternoon, we want to broaden the discussion and speak about the very real practical issue, quo vadis. La'an pneinu yuadot. Where are we heading? In what direction? Is it really possible to put the principles that we spoke about this morning into practice? What does a religious Jew have to say about the Arab problem? And the issues are very clear. Is the answer, as it has been suggested by many, forcing or encouraging the Arabs to leave? Ought we, may we, give up land for peace? What about areas that were already settled? How do you treat an Arab who is a card-carrying member of the PLO, but has not yet lifted his hand to destroy a Jew? In short, how do we deal with Arabs living in Israel? And what kind of stand do we take in the Shamir versus Peres controversy about the international conference? Is there a logical solution? A solution that combines all of the crucial issues that we spoke about this morning to the Arab problem in Israel. We have a very special and distinguished panel. Each speaker will give an opening statement for as long as he wishes. It's the first time that I've served as moderator, and the panelists would like to speak less rather than more. So each speaker can speak for as long as he wishes to open the area of discussion, and then they will have an opportunity to speak to each other as well as to answer your questions. First, it gives me great pride and pleasure to present Member of Knesset, Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Hesder Kiryat Arba, one of the founders of the political movement Tchiyah, a very important voice in what what is happening in Israel today and what will happen in Israel tomorrow. Harab Waldman, b'vakasha.
Thank you. I prefer to begin my presentation or build it around certain points which were put before me when I participated in another symposium with a professor of the Hebrew University by the name of Sternhal, where he presented 3 points of Zionism, and I had to relate to them, and this would give me the opportunity to relate to what Rabbi Riskin put before us, the problems that he put before us. Professor Sternhal presented 3 points. He said, first of all, that the Zionist movement was and is a movement for the liberation of a people, but not for the liberation of a land. That was his first point. Secondly, the Zionist movement, he said, was never a movement of vision, was never a movement of dreams, but was always very practical and realistic, without any sentiments. And thirdly, he said, the greatest disaster that came up that we have confusion with regards to value. We have a distortion of identification of value. Whereas many think that anyone who wants to be for the completeness of the land of Israel, he must be an Arab hater. It goes together. You cannot separate between them. And if one wants to be a liberal humanist, then he has to be willing to give up parts of our homeland. This must go together. Now, this is a great distortion of intellectual truths and values. And from this I want to get to this matter of the Zionist movement being, according to Professor Sternhal, a movement for the liberation of a people, but not for the liberation of a land. First of all, is there such an example of a liberated people without their land being liberated? Not only among the Jewish people, in general, in the world, in the history of nations. But not only that, are our ties, the Jewish people, ties with our homeland, the same as any nation in the modern world, any nation's ties to their homeland? The very concept of Zionism, the term Zion, is it not a place, a city, a land? How can one distort facts, history, values, ideals in such a way? And the Zionist movement was not and is not the movement of sentiments, of dreams, of vision, only practical and realistic in the very narrow sense. And of course, one would be afraid to even mention the concept mystical. This, of course, should not be mentioned. Herzl, Dr. Herzl, was certainly a man, a practical man, very realistic, without any dream, without any vision. Just like all the other Zionist leaders at the beginnings of Zionism. Or even when the Jewish state was established in 1948. Those who participated in establishing, in declaring, and at the head of them Ben-Gurion, who, by the way, said, and he was not an observant Jew, and he was the one who said, anyone in our generation who does not believe in miracles is not realistic. He's the one who said that. It is not necessary to be an old man, 80 or 100 years old, to know about and even to have experienced the consequences, the results of Zionist dreams and visions. One of them is right here before us, Efrat, or Gush Etzion, or Kiryat Arba and Hebron. These are all expressions, not of practical Jewish life, but of visionary Jewish life, of dreams coming true against practical calculations. This dream, this vision, is the most practical, realistic, and we use the Hebrew term of mamash, mamish, mamashut, reality of Jewish life in our generation, as it was always that way, ever since HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Abraham Avinu, Lech lecha, el haaretz asher areka. And the Six-Day War, being the greatest disaster that had come upon us, well, maybe the greatest disaster was the declaration of Jewish independence in Eretz Israel. Because this was the cause which brought about in the end the Six-Day War. If there wouldn't have been a Jewish state, there wouldn't have been the Six-Day War. If Jews wouldn't have begun coming back here 100 years ago in great numbers, then we wouldn't have all of these problems with the Arabs. We do have many problems in our state. Many problems. Difficult problems. Economic problems, social problems, problems of security. Many difficulties and pains. And we've had to be bringing sacrifices all these years. Just yesterday, a Jew died only because he had the chutzpah of walking around the streets of Yerushalayim. Jewish boys were killed here in this area not only in 1948, but 4 years ago, and 5 years ago, and 6 years ago, and 7 years ago, just for the right, standing upon the rights of walking the streets of Hebron, of the city of Abraham Avinu. It's difficult. So maybe we should come to the conclusion, who needs all these problems? Who needs all of these responsibilities of running an independent Jewish state? Even fighting among Jews. Maybe we should just all pack up and go back to Galut. In Galut, as we all know, we never had any problems. That's what's implied by saying the greatest disaster that came upon us was the Six-Day War. That disaster brought us back home, to the heart of Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, to Hebron, to Beth El, and Shiloh, and Yericho, and Shechem. And when Jews for 2,000 years dreamt and prayed to come back to Eretz Yisrael. They didn't dream about Tel Aviv and Haifa, unless they were really wild dreamers. They dreamt about coming back to Yerushalayim and Hebron and Shem and Yericho. Of course, we have a demographic problem too. We do have a problem. We cannot run away from it. We have to relate to it. But how do we relate to such a problem? The leaders of the Zionist movement in the late 30s and the 40s demanded the right to establish an independent Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael, when there was no danger of the Arabs becoming a majority. The Arabs were a majority in Eretz Yisrael. And it is not the Zionist leadership that demanded the partition of Eretz Yisrael. The partition of Eretz Yisrael was forced upon us. True, they were dreamers. They were believers. They were believers in two very important ways. All the different factions of believers, whether believing in God, in a godly guided process of redemption, or believers in the Jewish people, in the Jewish land, in Kedushat Eretz Yisrael, in the power of Eretz Yisrael. They believe that the very touch with this land, with this earth, will bring out the best in the Jewish people. The best ideals, whether they be religious ideals, spiritual ideals, social ideals. And they were willing to give their lives for it. They believed in two ways. I want to summarize their beliefs. They believed in the two magic words, Ein Bereira. We have no choice. This is our only land. And we want to live. And living means also not only bringing back to life the essence of Jewish life, but being a blessing to the peoples of the world, which can only be achieved by us coming back to life in our land. And I want to say it clearly, especially before you, my dear friends here, they believed in Aliyah. And that is why, despite the demographic problem, they believed in our right to Eretz Yisrael. Maybe we'll get to the matter of Aliyah. Maybe it's a matter to be discussed by itself. And now I want to begin from the beginning, meaning touching upon the roots of our values and ideals with regards to Eretz Yisrael and with regards to going to the Arabs. When Avraham Avinu was told by HaKadosh Baruch, by God, commanded to go to Eretz Yisrael, those two psukim in Parshat Lech Lecha, Lech Lecha mi'artzecha u'mimoladetecha u'mibeit avicha el haaretz asher ar'eka. Go to the land which I will show you. Ve'e'escha l'goy gadol. I will make you into a great nation. It doesn't end with these words. It ends with the words v'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adamah. They will be blessed by you, all the families of the world. All the nations of the world will be blessed by you. You must come to completion of yourself as a nation, and you will be a great nation, and that will only be in Eretz Yisrael. And only in this way will you be a blessing to the nations of the world. And I believe in this goal. And only in this way will this goal be achieved. Let's remember, my dear friends, this area was the cradle of civilization. This area of Eretz Israel and the surrounding areas. After the Jews were driven out of Eretz Israel, after the destruction of the Second Temple, this area became desolate. In all senses. In the physical sense, in the spiritual sense, in the cultural sense, in the social sense, desolate. Until Jews began coming back in great numbers about 100 years ago. We knew it would be that way because the Torah tells us, God told us that it would be that way. In the Tochacha, in that portion of the Torah in Sefer Vayikra, Parshat Bechukotai, the blessing and the curse, one of the curses says that when the Jews will not heed the word of God, they will be driven out of Eretz Israel. And then the Torah says, "V'hashimoti ani et haaretz v'shamamu aleha oiveichem hayoshvim ba." I will make the land desolate, and the peoples who will live there will be desolate. And Rashi tells us that this is a blessing within the curse. Just as the Jewish people in all lands of exile will remain loyal to the Jewish land, in the same way the land will remain loyal to the Jewish people. It will not bear its fruit for other peoples. And other people will make any effort to develop the land. And all this came true. I have nothing against a people, groups of people, deciding now, as some of the Arabs living in this area decided more than 20 years ago that from now on they are a Palestinian nation. No one is to tell anyone else if he is a nation or not a nation. Everyone will decide for himself. But the fact that they decided that from now on they are a Palestinian nation does not give them the right to demand my homeland. Ever since the Jews were driven out of here, no nation, no group of people for 2,000 years ever claimed this land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan. No one ever claimed this as their homeland. Eretz Israel was never a political national entity by itself during these 2,000 years. It was part of empires, a Roman Empire, a Byzantine Empire, a Christian Empire, a Muslim Empire, a Turkish Empire. But this land by itself, between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, was never claimed to be a homeland, a national political entity of any nation, except for the Jewish people who claimed it. No one ever made an effort to develop this land, and that's why it remained undeveloped. Now, getting back to the matter of the problems that we have. In principle, I am against conditioning our right to our land or our willingness to keep our homeland, conditioning this upon the solution of all our problems. Where in the history of nations did a people, or was a people ready to give a part of its homeland because of problems they had? And who didn't have problems? The solution for a headache is to cut off your head. And we have great problems. But the starting point is not problems. The root of the matter is to understand the ties between a people and a land. Where is there a precedent for a people willing to compromise on its homeland? Unless being forced to by war, of course, being conquered. No such precedent. Any nation, democratic, liberal nation in the Western world, who would be willing to give up an inch or a meter of any corner, southern or western or eastern corner of their land? An inch. Another colleague of mine from Mapam, when discussing these matters with me before a group of, then it was a group of goyim, said that this is one of the highest ideals of life, compromise. He said, I cannot live with my wife for a week without making a compromise, without compromising with my wife. Then shouldn't we compromise on our land? And I told him, I agree with you. You cannot live with your wife even for a week without compromising with your wife. You compromise with your wife and not on your wife. Someone would demand that you make a compromise and share your wife with someone. You would do that? You make compromise in your house, but not on your house, not on your home. If you relate to it as your home. You sometimes hear from people on the left of the political scene. Well, of course, יש לנו זיקה לארץ ישראל. How would you say זיקה, Rabbi Riskin? No, connection is not enough. Strong tie. We have strong ties to Judah and Shomron and Yerushalayim and Hebron and so forth. Yes, we do, but we're willing to compromise on those ties. Who will believe you that you have strong ties to your own land if you're willing to compromise? What kind of talk is that? Now, let not the Jewish people who have real special ties to their land, not create that precedent compromising on their land. And then not being taken seriously with regards to our ties to our land. And there are enough amongst the peoples of the world, not to speak about our Arab neighbors, that claim that we don't have any ties to our land, that their ties are stronger, or that these are ties that are equal to others' ties to this land as a nation. I want to say clearly, all human beings were created in the image of God, B'Tselem Elokim, and all should be related to in such a way as being humans created in the image of God. Our special trait, which we call in Hebrew Zgulat Yisrael, being a chosen people, this does not allow us, certainly does not allow us, and whoever claims it does, distorts this special trait, does not allow us to relate immorally to anyone, not only to human beings, even to animals, even to a piece of grass or a flower. On the contrary, this special Jewish trait obligates us to be even more moral. And this is part of our responsibility. And our demands for the rights to our land and remaining here stem from this responsibility of being a blessing to the nations. No blessing will come to any people by Jews relinquishing their rights to any part of Eretz Israel. It is a distortion of the facts. Weakening our hold upon Eretz Israel will only incite even more terror, not only against Jews. Arabs will be killing each other here even more than in Lebanon. I hear some of my colleagues on the left always saying, Well, that's not our responsibility if Arabs kill themselves. In our land, it is our responsibility. Now, just to summarize at this point, determining the fate of a nation, of a people, of a land, is something that cannot be done just by being immersed in the problems that we have today. The life of the Jewish people is not something which is just going to go on for another 10, 20, 50, or 100 years. It is an everlasting project, eternal project. So we have problems today, which we have to relate. And probably by the questions or by the remarks that will be made by my colleague, by Dr. Ravitzky, we'll relate to them too. But on principle, I'm not relating to them now because, as I said, our connection to our land and our responsibility to our land is something that should not be conditioned upon the immediate solution of all problems. And what if I don't have an immediate solution? Are we children that demand immediate solutions for everything? We have to continue our Zionist visionary dream, and I'm not ashamed of it, to continue to realize our dreams. And just one word, we are celebrating Chag HaSukkot now. The Sfat Emet, the late Rabbi of Gur, the Hasidei Gur, writes in his book, why is Chag HaSukkot Zman Simchatenu and not Pesach or Shavuot? He says, because Pesach, we had to overcome the Egyptians. And we have a klala principle, which is expressed in Mishlei and Proverbs, Binfol oyivcha al tismach. When your enemy falls, do not rejoice. Chag HaShavuot, we received the Torah, which separated us from the Goyim. L'avdil etchem minam. Chag HaSukkot, in the Beit HaMikdash, we brought sacrifices for all the 70 nations of the world. We prayed for all of them. We expressed our responsibility for all the nations of the world. That is why it is Man Simchatenu. And this is our responsibility. And this responsibility will best be served by the Jewish people being a great nation in our complete land in Eretz Yisrael.
Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Waldman. Our next distinguished speaker, Professor of Philosophy at the Hebrew University, visiting professor and scholar in residence internationally, including my own alma mater, Yeshiva University. A very prolific author who has not satisfied himself with the ivory tower of scholarship, but has taken very strong stands in major political and religious questions of the day. One of the founding members and leaders of Netivot Shalom. It is my pleasure to present Professor Aviezer Ravitzky.
Good afternoon. I understand that I am the only speaker here who is not originally an American. And it gives me, on the one hand, an advantage on Rabbi Waldman because of my Israeli accent. You are not but according to your accent, I was sure that you are. Okay. So I lost my joke and I'll start my speech. One of the most well-known texts in medieval Jewish thought is the book of Kuzari by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. And it was constructed by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as a fictive debate between a rabbi, a Jewish scholar on the one hand, and the pagan king on the other. And throughout the book, the rabbi is supposed to convince the pagan king about the merits of Judaism and the ethical and religious superiority of the Jewish people. Only twice throughout the book, the rabbi is saying something, the king responds, and the rabbi has no answer, and he has to admit, you have found my weak point, the king of the Khazars. And these 2 points are very relevant for our own days. The first instance is very well known, at least in Israel. I hope it will be well known also abroad. When the rabbi spoke about our commitment and loyalty to the land of Israel, the immediate response of the pagan king was, you only pray, you only speak, you only preach about your intimate link with the Holy Land, but you do not do anything to implement, to realize, to fulfill it. You don't go there. And the immediate response of the rabbi was, you have found my weak point, O king of the Khazars. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi himself, after finishing the book, went into the land of Israel. At least made every possible effort. It is very well known in Israel, it is not so well known in abroad. And there is also a second instance. Perhaps it is much better known in abroad, it is not so well known in some areas in Israel, and in some circles. When the rabbi claims, we Jews, we are murdered, and we are persecuted throughout history. But we don't murder, and we don't persecute. Perhaps I'll add, I'm sure if Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wrote it after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal and Great Britain, he would also say, we are expelled from many countries, we don't expel. Our rights are negated, we don't negate the rights of others. The immediate response of the pagan king was, כאשר תמצא ידכם תהרגו, in the Hebrew translation. In the English translation, when you have the power, you will murder, you will kill, and you will behave like everybody else. It's very easy to sit in the 12th century or the 20th century in exile and to preach about our link toward the land of Israel on the one hand, and about the ethical merit and superiority of the Jewish people on the other. But these slogans and these declarations didn't have to confront reality, the challenge of reality, and the clash of values. Today, this generation in the land of Israel is destined and is privileged to be challenged by these 2 values and these 2 demands altogether. On the one hand, our loyalty and commitment to the land of Israel, and on the other, is it right? Who was right? The pagan king who claimed that it's not that we have something unique on the spiritual and ethical and religious level. It's only that we are weak. When you are weak, ethics is your interest, because it protects you from the strong powers. Let's see, the pagan king said, when you are going to have the power like everybody else, when you have the power to defend yourself, but also to attack somebody else, or to negate his rights, let's see if you are going to be unique. And this generation and the second generation will decide who was right. The rabbi who claimed that there is something inherent in the belief and the spirituality of the Jewish people which makes it unique, or it was only because we were weak. There are groups in Israel who are loyal and committed almost only to the first goal. There are groups in Israel who are loyal almost only to the second goal. And the very difficult task, and the two rabbis who spoke in the morning touched on it, touched it. This is a very difficult task and goal, problematic, and what solution you take, you pay a price. If there was a solution without paying a price, Rabbi Waldman, Rabbi Riskin, and myself, and everybody else will agree. But each solution demands a price. Now, we came back home, no doubt, to the land of Israel. According to our faith, according to our historical consciousness, according to the biblical promise, it is our home. And we came back home and we didn't find it empty. There are people there are people here, individuals and a people. Because as Rabbi Waldman claimed, they define themselves a people. They didn't ask me. Perhaps if they asked me, they wouldn't be here. But they didn't. Now the question that I came back home and I found somebody else, is it significant from the Torah point of view? I have no time to deal with it, but even let's take the example that Rabbi Waldman mentioned. The promise to Abraham, the Brit Ben Abtarim. I'm sure that everybody remembers not only the beginning of Brit Ben Abtarim, in which God promised Abraham the land, but also the end, in which God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, told Abraham that the real redemption of the people of Israel and the real fulfillment of our right to the land will be delayed for 400 years. Why? ועבדום ועינו אותם 400 שנה. God forbid, will be enslaved by the Egyptians for 400 years. Why? כי לא שלם עוון האמורי ידענה. There was another people who dwelt here, not Muslims, who are considered to be ger toshav, and they don't commit incest and paganism and idol worship. But the Amorites, who according to the Torah is a symbol of idol worship and incest and bloodshed. But their sin is not complete, so it is a human fact. It's, Rabbi Waldman, it's not a problem. These are human beings. And the Muslims and the Amorites, there is no common denominator between the Muslims and the Amorites, according to our halakha, gadah, tradition. But even about the Amorites, we had to wait 400 years. I don't suggest that we'll delay our fulfillment of the right to the land of Israel for 400 years. But the human fact exists there, and it cannot be ignored. And the same Abraham, when he had problems with Lot, his nephew, did he say to him, no, this is homeland, no compromise, this is my wife? He didn't say so. According to the Torah, he told Lot, you can choose. I'm not going to tell them choose. But I cannot ignore their existence here. And Abraham said to Lot, you can go to Bikat Yarden, which is the land of Israel. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu was revealed to Abraham perhaps 10 minutes later or 10 hours later. In the Torah, it's very close, and promised him again, this is going to be your land. Namely, you didn't betray the land. Because we shouldn't identify the question of the sanctity of the land, which is eternal, with the political problem of the concrete political borders of a state. As long as the Messiah did not come, we shouldn't mix these two questions. Now, first of all, there are deep differences, and there is a deep debate between Rabbi Waldman and his followers' approach and my friend's approach. And I'm going to criticize the other approach, not on the personal basis. There are many tzaddikim in the other side, better than me. But I would like to explain very directly why I believe they are wrong. On both levels. The security of the Jewish people here, and the spirituality and ethics of the Jewish people. And I'm sure that Rabbi Waldman believes that I'm wrong, and it's not the first time that we argue, and I hope we'll argue a few more times until he will be convinced. But we'll be friends. We'll keep our friendship. So, what I'm asking myself about every approach is, first of all, how does it help our security? Does it make us safer in our homeland? And second, does it make us better? Better Jews, better human beings? Certainly, the premise is that it is our land and we are here. And we are here not to live. But let's take this approach, first of all, and ask ourselves, does it make us safer? So if I tell you my predictions about the future, we can argue. But the past is well known. If we followed Rabbi Waldman's and his followers' approach, first of all, we didn't have a peace with Egypt, and we would still have a state of awe with Egypt, because they objected to the Camp David treaty, and I wouldn't take the risk to predict how many Israeli kids could be killed, because I'm not a prophet. But in any case, before 73, it was Moshe Dayan who adopted this attitude. He changed his mind after 73. But before, he said that Sharm el-Sheikh without peace is more important, is better than peace without Sharm el-Sheikh. So he paid 3,000 kids, and Dayan and Weizmann changed their mind. I hope we will not pay any price. But there is no doubt that if we follow this approach, we wouldn't have a peace treaty with Egypt, because they voted against it and they fought against it, and we would still have a state of war with Egypt. Secondly, autonomy. They also objected to the solution of the autonomy of Menachem Begin. Thirdly, we will be still stuck in Lebanon today, because they objected the evacuation of Lebanon, the withdrawal from Lebanon. I would say that almost every positive action from the security point of Israel was done against the will of the right in Israel. But they took us into Lebanon. I don't want to generalize, because I think I have a lot of criticism against the Labour Party too, regarding other issues. But try to imagine situations we still have a state of war with Egypt. We are still stuck in Lebanon. Today, Menachem Begin, who wanted the 40 kilometers, honestly, he didn't want to create a new political order in Lebanon. But some other people, some Aviezer leaders, including my distinguished colleague, spoke at the beginning of the Lebanese war about creating the new political order, not only in Lebanon, but in the Middle East. It's not because they are foolish, God forbid. It's not because they are wicked, God forbid. I would like to have many just and intelligent and tzaddikim friends and Talmidei Chachamim as Rabbi Waldman. But I believe it is a conception that they are caught in. And this conception is that you can accept only a total solution. Is or the whole land of Israel, or it's nothing. For instance, if you ask me, I wouldn't accept the analogy of operation of the head. If I give back Sinai or Jericho. But I would say that sometimes, to save the body, you cut a finger or even your hand. This is the model of Rabbi Lichtish and Rabbi Amital, very close to him, the two Rashi Yeshiva, who spoke about the legitimization of a halachic legitimization of a territorial compromise, but they didn't speak about an operation in which you cut your head. But sometimes, if you have no choice, you cut a finger. or God forbid you cut your head. The psychological, but it's not only psychology, it's faith. The attitude which believes that you can accept only coherent, consistent, total, radical solutions. Everything or nothing. I believe it's very dangerous. And let's take the Arabs. This was, and it is still is, the attitude of 95% of the political leaders of the Arabs. No territorial compromise, no Jew in the Middle East, in Dar al-Islam, in the house of Islam. And they were consistent, and they were loyal, and they were committed to their ideology, and they lost one political position after another. And with Zionism, who was built upon compromises from the beginning, the revisionist party who didn't accept compromise was pushed into opposition, and then outside the Histadrut HaTzionit, the Zionist organization these days. Later on, I'm very glad that they came back. Today, even the Reform Jews came to the Zionist organization. This is the success of Zionism. And every camp today is joining, at least formally, Zionism. But the mainstream of Zionism was built upon compromise, and that's why we succeeded and the Arabs failed. And then they used terror. And they lost one position after another because of their terror. Today, there are some kids, perhaps some leaders, but at least some kids who recommend that we use terror too. So, today we're speaking against an international conference that is supposed, according to Mr. Peres, to lead us to a direct dialogue with the Arabs. Every risk towards peace is a serious risk. But also a war is a very significant risk. So if you ask me, I'm not an expert in politics. But if I analyze the predictions of Mr. Rabin and Mr. Peres on the one hand, and if I analyze the predictions of Mr. Sharon and Mr. Waldman on the other in the past, I believe that we have to try, I don't promise you anything, but you have to try to follow the first group of leaders, and they even succeeded to cause King Hussein to declare that he knows that it cannot be accepted that Israel will go back to the Green Line. So today Hussein understands and declares that we are not going back to the Green Line. So he also accepts the idea of a territorial compromise. This with regard to safety and security. Now what about the question, does this approach make us better? And I'm the only one who will criticize a person or a Jew or a human being for his own ethics. I'm speaking about what it causes to us as a people. What is happening to our people in this permanent conflict, in which our all energy is devoted to the conflict with our neighbors? What is happening to us? You got today the paper of the Hasidim of Kahana. But if you go, and Rabbi Waldman does not agree with Kahana, I wouldn't debate Kahana. I wouldn't sit with him on the same floor. Rabbi Waldman does not agree with Kahana. However, you heard today Rabbi Riskin. How many followers Rabbi Riskin ideology will have in Kiryat Arba, Rabbi Waldman's city, and how many followers Kahana has? And in Kiryat Arba there is a coalition with Kahana. The municipality of Kiryat Arba is built upon the help of the powers of Kahana, the voters.
Let's just fix the fact the coalition is not with Kahana.
It was built with the followers of Kahana. Then they left.
At a certain time.
A certain time. Okay,
There is no coalition in Kiryat Arba with Kahana today.
what enabled, we both speak about the same fact. What enabled originally the coalition, the municipal coalition in Kiryat Arba was with the help of Kahana supporters, not Kahana himself. He doesn't live there. And why is it? Why is it that today, God forbid, you can hear among Jewish youth, not only among Arab youth, expressions of hatred, a will to create an expulsion, sometimes a tolerance towards bloodshed? Yes, I condemn brutally and dramatically every terrorist activity of Arabs against Jews. But I also condemn at the same level those rare events of terrorism of Jews against Arabs. And I hear again and again the leaders of the Likud and Atchiyah would like that those people who, according to the Supreme Court of Israel, were found as murderers and gone world prison for their whole life, at first they didn't want that a trial will take place, and then that they will be sent home. My children, what will they learn from it if they succeed? Will they learn to admire and to respect every human being as we heard now? After they killed innocent Arabs, I mean innocent, I don't know their heart, but those who were killed accidentally as students, and they didn't commit any crime. Perhaps they don't like me. I also don't like them. So it's a tolerance. How do you say kalut rosh v'shlichut damim? Kalut rosh. Is it a levity towards bloodshed? Is there a borderline between one human being who is a Jew and another human being who is an Arab? Or is it that we can speak about every human being who is created in the image of God? However, when it comes to concrete questions, our people is something else, and this is also my emotions. However, my categorical ethical command does not allow me to treat them differently. But we are still unique people. I'll tell you why we are still unique people. We are still unique people, for example, because among the Arabs, when they have terrorists, they make them heroes. And we condemn them into prison. But there are significant factors within the Jewish people today who would like to imitate the Arabs regarding to our very few murderers. We are still unique people because when we were indirectly responsible for bloodshed in Sabra and Shatila, indirectly, we established an investigation committee. And I believe that 1,000 years from now, the heroic decisions and criticism of this investigation committee will be remembered. But again, these then factors and these then powers objected to the establishment of the investigation committee. So we are unique people, perhaps despite them. It's very difficult for me to claim it because sometimes I feel that there are some secular Jews, not all of them, but some secular Jews who help us to be kept as unique people with regard to humanistic questions, sometimes more than some religious Jews. Perhaps, altogether, we are one good people. And I expect the leaders of religious Zionism, and certainly I expect the leaders of Likud and Atchiyah, if it is not only a political question, if it's not only the question of land, but also, as we heard, a human question, and we are a blessing upon the nations, once I would like to hear criticism, perhaps even attack, when we are doing something wrong. We are very good, but sometimes we are doing something wrong, don't we? Don't you, in your family? And when individuals from us are doing things that were defined as ma'aseh nevala by the brigadier commander, the hero, the commander of Judea and Samaria, the Israeli general Mitzna, he defined these activities in the Isha as ma'aseh nevala. How would you translate ma'aseh nevala? I cannot pronounce it, but I believe Rabbi Riskin. I believe Rabbi Riskin. At least, I would like that people from our camp, and this is still my camp, because my children are going to Bnei Akiva, and they will be educated with the children of Rabbi Waldman. Perhaps one day they will marry one another if Rabbi Waldman the Great. This is still my family, and I would like to hear these leaders, the Bandit Investigation Committee. Perhaps something was wrong in Sabra and Shatila. Today we know the results of the investigation committee. Perhaps something was wrong with the Machteret, with the underground, with the Aisha. Perhaps, I don't know. Is it right that it is always secular people from Peace Now movement who would mention ethical problems? And then Rabbi Waldman was very right in saying that everybody who is exposed, I don't quote him, but this is where I understood him, everybody who is exposed to the media in Israel can get the impression as if you have to choose between two exclusive alternatives. The first is that human dignity, peace, the sanctity of human life, etc., is very dear to you. However, with regard to the land of Israel, to the historical connection to the land, and with regard to the Torah, you are alienated. This is one option. And as if the second option is that the land of Israel is very dear and close to you on the biblical and historical basis, and the whole Torah is very dear to you. However, with regard to the sanctity of human life, the value of peace, human dignity, etc., these are Western, so to speak, Western values. And certainly Rabbi Waldman does not think so. But there are many, unfortunately, young people among our camp who may get this impression. If, whenever we speak only about our real adherence to the land, and not about concrete ethical problems, not only declarations. And I understand that I have to finish. I never like to finish speaking. Nobody offers me a job. So, I would like to conclude by saying that perhaps there is no partner on the other side. I cannot promise you that there is a partner. Perhaps we make every possible effort. Perhaps we accept the idea of a territorial compromise for peace, and we will fail. But for me, first of all, perhaps we'll succeed. And I accept the idea of taking risk for peace, not only for war. But even if I fail, three days ago, I was privileged to perform the bris for my newborn child. Thank you very much. 18 years from now, he'll go to the army. If he will have to fight, he will fight. If he has to fight. But I want to be sure that I'll be able to look directly into his eyes and tell him, we did everything possible to prevent it, to prevent a war. Now, if there is a war, despite our efforts, go and God bless you.
We are limited to 3 o'clock, so I would suggest the following format. I would ask each of the speakers to limit themselves to 5-minute responses. And then I will open up the audience for questions. I would just like to, if possible, ask each of the speakers in their responses to perhaps take into account the following issues. First of all, Rabbi Waldman, what about the millions of Arabs who live here? What do we do about them? And secondly, we've heard a great deal of what we cannot do in terms of negotiations. What can we positively suggest? And secondly, Professor Ravitzky, what about the argument זה אומר כולה שלי וזה אומר כולה שלי יחלוקו. זה אומר כולה שלי וזה אומר חצי שלי, it gets much less. Secondly, would you even negotiate with the PLO given their present charter? And thirdly, what are the limitations of your negotiations? Would you even agree to give back Gush Etzion and the Brat?
Very good. First of all, I accept willingly the possibility of Dr. Ravitzky being my Mechuzin. And to be realistic, although I may be accused of being a mystic and a dreamer, we probably will meet in the future, Bezrat Hashem, discuss things together. I don't think I will convince him, just like he won't convince me, but we'll still remain friends, even if I don't have a hope of convincing him. I don't think 5 minutes will be enough. After Dr. Ravitzky had a long time to relate to what I said. I'll relate, first of all, in the same order of things, to the security problem, and then to the ethical problem, and then to the first word that I'm willing to do away with that. I think they'll be here. And then to the words quoted from the Kuzari. I think, Dr. Ravitzky, by relating to our past experience, I cannot understand your conclusions with regards to war and peace. Did our security problems begin after 1967? Did the Arabs attack us and want to take all of Eretz Israel from us only after we liberated Judah and Shomron? That's our experience with the Arab terror? And how can you say, and I must say, that you hurt me deeply, and I think the Jewish people, you were unfair to them, and to some of our leaders, who I also didn't agree with. But how can you accuse and say that because Dayan did not want to make a compromise on Sinai or give up Sharm el-Sheikh before 73, that's why we lost 3,000? And how many would we have lost if we would have made a compromise then? How many Jewish cities would have been attacked if the war would have begun from the Gaza Strip?
as in 1967, Nasser prepared to attack, at least be fair enough to say, maybe. And not tell us that 3,000 were lost for this reason. And it doesn't matter what I believe about how the Lebanese war was fought. But you're so sure of that if we wouldn't have attacked in Lebanon, no Jewish soldiers would have been killed? After we found what Arafat prepared in Lebanon, what he had in store for us, the tanks and the thousands of terrorists, at least be fair enough to say that we don't know what would have happened. And we would have finished the Lebanese matter within 2 weeks after it started if the left wouldn't have demonstrated in the middle of the war, the first time that happened in Israel, that Jewish leaders organized demonstrations when the nation was at war. Doesn't matter if I agree with Sharon, and I don't allow you to generalize and put all of the right in one bowl, together with Sharon or this and that. This is not the time to speak about Sharon or anyone else. The first time in history, because the labor was in opposition. When Begin was in opposition during the Yom Kippur War, after the left, the leadership of the left brought us to that tragedy, the right did not demonstrate during the war. And let's remember the facts and not distort them. We know what the Arabs want. Hussein will jump on any bandwagon that he thinks that he can succeed. Just as he jumped on the Nasser bandwagon when he thought he would gain something by it. Now he knows he cannot gain by it, of course. But it is not Hussein who will determine if Jews will be terrorized or not. And it is not even Arafat that will determine. They all line up in back of the most extreme of theirs. And how can you accuse us or me of having a conception of everything or nothing? And how can you compare the situation today to the situation which was there before the establishment of the Jewish state, and saying Zionism was always based on compromise? Of course, when we didn't have anything, we agreed to accept whatever they gave us. That's not a compromise on practical matters. In fact, the one compromise was forced upon us when we didn't have anything. More than half of Eretz Yisrael was taken away from us in 1922. After it was recognized as being part of Eretz Yisrael by the conference in San Remo after the First World War and by the Balfour Declaration. What was then Transjordan. All or nothing? We didn't suggest to initiate a war in order to liberate Judah and Shomron. We didn't initiate the war. We didn't suggest going to war to liberate Judea and Samaria. Just as we're not suggesting today to go to war and liberate the Gilad and Moab, which is also part of Eretz Israel. We didn't initiate it, and we're not suggesting it. But when being attacked, what kind of ethics? Going in the direction, yielding to the Goyim, to force upon us ethics that no nation accepts for itself, when being attacked, defending ourselves. And because of those attacks, to liberate parts of Eretz Yisrael which are ours. And again I say, there were Arabs here when we came back here. But that does not give them a nationalistic right. They have personal rights to live in Eretz Yisrael, conditioned upon their loyalty to the Jewish state. Just as in any democratic country in the West, people receive rights conditioned upon their willingness to accept obligations, foremost among which is a loyalty to that government and state. I'm saying today, just as putting it, this is what we have to understand from what you said, Dr. Ravitzky, that only those who are for territorial compromise are those who want peace. Because only territorial compromise will assure peace. At least be fair enough to say that there is another conception, that only territorial compromise will bring war, and a worse war than ever we had. And the only way to assure peace is by having that patience and not demanding immediate solutions. And I want to accuse, if that is to be considered an accusation, I don't think so, but in the terms of our left, to be mystical, that's quite an evil accusation. If there are mystics among us, these are the people on the left side of the political spectrum. Those who live in the clouds and don't believe the Arabs. When the Arabs say they want all of Eretz Israel, when the Arabs say that Jerusalem is to be the capital of a Palestinian state, and some people are just in the clouds. No, they're just saying it. That's not being mystical. Let's be realistic. The truth is, when I meet with some, and I meet quite often, with youth of a Shomer HaTzair and others, just this past summer I met, and when they demand of me to be willing to give up my home in Hebron for peace, and he asked this young girl, where do you live? In Beersheba, she said. I said, well, why are you so good-hearted on the expense of my home? Would you be willing to give up your home in Beersheba for peace? And she said, yes, of course. Everyone will have his own conclusions to be taken from that. Now, we've spoken about this quite a few times, my friend. How can you, in one same sentence, speak about Arab terror and Jewish terror? That's intellectual fairness? Of course, we said and we criticized what certain Jews did when they took the law into their own hands. And not only took their law into their own hands, but even did things that shouldn't have been done. Morally shouldn't have been done. But can you compare someone who initiates murder and someone who reacts to those murders, even if you react not in the way you should react, and takes upon himself the responsibility and goes to be tried and admits to what he has done and sits in jail for that? And we're not even allowed to ask for them to be pardoned? That's not a democratic right? That's not within the realm of the law of Israel to be pardoned? Only 1,000, more than 1,000 of Arab terrorists can be pardoned? And that's how you relate to Arab terror and Jewish terror? Jews initiated terror? Jews initiated killing Arabs? I hope you'll never have that experience, Dr. Ravitzky, of bringing up children who before their very eyes, their friends are killed. I have to bring up children before whose eyes my students were massacred on Friday night by Arabs. And I teach them to love human beings, Arabs included. Immediately after that massacre, That's not an easy matter. The present situation is such in Eretz Israel that Jews feel uncomfortable walking around certain places in Eretz Israel, making tiyulim. No Arab feels uncomfortable or feels in danger by walking around in Eretz Israel. And despite the fact that you said that there are rare occasions of Jewish terror, but how can you speak about it together? We're not endangering any Arabs. And now I think you were very unfair to the Jewish people in Eretz Israel, my friend, when bringing those words from the Kuzan and just giving the impression now the Jews are strong, now the Jews suppress others.
Challenge.
Okay, you gave that impression. Jews were driven out of countries, now Jews drive others out of countries. My dear friend, there are many Arabs living here. The only Arabs deported from here were Arab terrorists who endangered not only individual Jews, but endanger the very rule, Jewish democratic rule in Eretz Israel. Nowhere in any Arab nation do Arabs have democratic rights like they have not only in Israel, but in Judea and Samaria. Nowhere in any Arab nation. And we're not standing up to that challenge? Of course, sometimes things occur that shouldn't occur. Under pressure, under such terrible pressure of terror, we're not suppressing anyone. And I certainly am against military rule in Judea and Samaria. There should be civil rule of the state of Israel in all of Judea and Samaria. Should have been done 20 years ago. Should have been enacted. Civil rule. And then we'll have a problem, yes. What rights to give to the Arabs? First of all, democratic rights, citizenship rights should be given to anyone who accepts the responsibility and obligations of citizenship. And the first obligation is a pledge of allegiance to the Jewish state and a willingness to do national service, not army service, national service, in their own towns. And that also takes time to become a citizen. It takes time. Some nations have 5 years, some 7, and then you have security investigations. We have to have that. Now, our basic ethical principle is, and that's the highest ethical principle, we want to live. And we want to have a respectful, honorable life. And also, respectful, honorable life. We don't want to worry about children traveling in buses on this road here and stones being thrown at them like dogs. And then having some army officers saying, well, it's only stones. What are we, dogs in our country? Now, also quoting, you are not very much informed, Dr. Ravitzky. The commander of the Central Front, you would call it, Aluf Mitzna, he expressed his sorrow for using that word, which was translated dastardly. He expressed his sorrow for using it. It was not in place. But not only that, he now knows the truth. And in the courts it will come out. They have not been put on trial yet. But there were lies there that the Arabs began throwing the stones. And you're already speaking about it just as if the Jews are to blame. An international conference, my friends, this is the last point involved. Which nation would give to a group of other nations when you know from the very beginning what their attitude is, they will decide our fate. That's how an independent nation acts. What kind of a way of negotiating is this? You want to negotiate with us respectfully, you and we, with our enemies, with Hussein, not with terrorists. What do we need Russia there for? What do we need China there in an international conference? And who's going to believe that the Russian delegation will come to an international conference and have a drink of vodka, l'chaim, and then go home and not intervene in the negotiations? Who is that mystic? And Mr. Peres is quite a mystic in this sense, who's going to try and convince us, as he's almost convinced Schultz. Schultz doesn't want it, but he's almost convinced it. To bring the Russians here. We believe that in order to ensure peace, of course, we're willing to take risks. Necessary risks, not unnecessary risks. Of course, if you go around the world and tell them we must have an international conference, of course Hussein will not be willing to come and talk. Why should he? He can have an international conference. Yeah, many of the Jews want an international conference. Why should he come to speak to us straightforwardly? Putting us to shame, just that we're not worthy of being spoken to. You're saying here you won't sit together with Kahana. I won't go into that problem. I don't know if you say the same thing about not willing to speak with some Arab. Or with someone, not even PLO, not a PLO. I believe that Ravitzky will not speak with a PLO. Or to speak with some Jew on the left, who is inciting Jews against Jews. You also wouldn't speak with Yossi Sarid on the same platform? Or Shulamit Anoni? Jews who came to Hebron after Aaron Gross, the American, was killed. In the same 7 days of Avelut, they came to Hebron in order to express their identification with the Arabs. I'm not for, how would you say, putting in Khairan? Ostracizing any Jews. Any Jew whose intentions, who wants the good of the Jewish people, even if he's mistaken. I don't think Kahana represents the truth of Torah or of Eretz Yisrael. I think he distorts the truth of Torah and Eretz Yisrael. But please say the same difficult things about Jews on the other extreme. Now, just one last word when speaking. Rabbi Riskin was right in asking what things positive should be done. A lot of positive things should be done. I think that we have to begin stressing in our education here to our children, not at the Ministry of Education. I told this to the Minister of Education quite a few times in the framework of the Committee for Education in the Knesset. Why do you stress and how do you want to achieve educational goals in matters of democracy and anti-racism, as he put it? You have these problems to the extent that you do have these problems, and we can argue about that, to what extent you have these problems, but there may, what? You have these problems to the extent that you have them here in Eretz Yisrael, problems of democracy and racism, and you can argue about it, to what extent you have such problems. But the way to attack these problems is by giving positive values in education. Jewish values and Zionist values, and these are the ones that should be stressed. Today, many of our youth don't know why they're here in Eretz Yisrael. They don't know why they're Jews. And of course, if you don't have the positive values, then some go to this extreme and some go to that extreme because of an empty feeling, a sense of emptiness. I don't think there was any nation in such a situation which we are in, such problems, that was more ethical than the Jewish people today. All our problems. And I think Rabbi Yehuda Levi would be proud of us. Wouldn't be afraid to answer the pagan king that attacked him and said what the Jews would be. here in Eretz Israel, despite the fact that we have exceptions and rare exceptions of things that should not be done. Just one more sentence. I want to tell all of us sitting here, when speaking about, and we hear many times the expression hitnachaluyot bilti chukiyot, illegal settlements. There are illegal Jewish settlements. These are the Jewish settlements in New York and Chicago and London. All Jewish settlements there are illegal.
This could be the best sentence to end our discussion or debate, so I hope not to forget to repeat it when I finish.
I'll remind you.
Okay. First of all, I take Rabbi Waldman's commitment seriously, namely, I expect him to have a newborn daughter next year. You don't expect my child to marry an old lady. So,
They'll have the free choice.
you are liberal. Okay. When I started with the example of Rabbi Yehuda Levi, I didn't mean to say, and I hope I didn't say, that we fail to meet the challenge. I wanted to try to analyze and describe the double challenge that we have to confront, and I believe that we are still Am Sgula, a unique people. And we are not going to learn ethics from the way the Americans treated the Indians, and the French, the Algerians, and the Soviets, the Afghanistans. And certainly not the Syrians in Hamas, and then King Hussein, and then Iraq and Iran. But I claim that as long as when we have even indirect responsibility for bloodshed, we establish investigation committee. As long we treat the rare events of murderers among us differently, strongly differently than they do, we will preserve our uniqueness. Secondly, regarding the definition of a terrorist, every terrorist in the world believes, honestly I believe, almost every terrorist, and claims it is only responding to the evil of the other side. I'm not going to represent the PLO, God forbid, but certainly they will say that they respond to our coming to the land, to our bombing of their Palestinian camps and so on. So they might claim the same thing. And the Supreme Court is supposed to be an objective one, and the Supreme Court decided, the Israeli one, that 3 of them committed a murder of first rate and sent them for the whole life into prison. I don't expect them to stay there for the whole life. But on the other hand, it's almost impossible, educationally, that immediately after the event, and even before the trial and after the trial, people will demand that they will go back home freely and will become heroes, God forbid. I'm sure Rabbi Waldman wouldn't like them to become heroes, but if they went home according to his demand, they would become heroes of many young people. It's not only about the international conference that many people are claiming that it will create war. It's also about Camp David. Almost the same people claim it. If it doesn't create war immediately when Sadat will die, certainly it will create war. Go and read the newspapers of those days. There are many people who would like to forget their declarations. It's not only that he died, he was murdered by fanatic Muslims. And after it, we conquered the first time in the history of the State of Israel an Arab capital. And according to a poll last week, 70% of, I believe 70, I don't remember, 65 or 70% of the Israelis are very satisfied from the result of Camp David. I am one among them. Regarding Lebanon, I'm speaking like a stenographer because I don't have the right time. Regarding Lebanon, Rabbi Waldman remember that almost all of them went into the war because this was a decision of the legitimate government, elected democratic government of Israel. I heard that the first day of the war, that the goals, our commander didn't speak about 40 kilometers. I knew much more than Begin knew. I'm sincere. In the first day, we were told that we are supposed to cross Beirut, לעבור את ביירות, לחבור אל הנוצרים בצפון, to meet the Christians in the north, namely the south of Lebanon and north Lebanon, and to create a new political order in Lebanon, the first day of the war. I didn't say I refuse, because I remembered that a few months before, many soldiers from Gush Emunim had to obey and to evacuate people from Yamit against their own ideology. Is democracy? Certainly, everybody has his own red line, but I believe 45% or 51, I don't know, of Israeli soldiers had the feeling that this is democratic government. And only 140 Israeli refused to serve in Lebanon. You have to realize that there are much more communists, Jewish communists in Israel than 140 young people. So it's a neglected number. Now, there were demonstrations at the beginning only from those circles. People who went into the war expressed their views. But only later, when it went on and on, and certainly after Sabra and Shatila, when there was no a direct military event, people went to demonstrate, politically and ethically, and I'm very proud for being there. I hope I represented also the newborn child. But what should be remembered is that people here didn't behave as many Americans in Vietnam. They accepted the decision of the legitimate government despite the deep disagreement. Now regarding Dayan and the Yom Kippur War, it's not me. It is Dayan who, in his book, wrote that in 71, we could achieve something like Camp David. Perhaps you don't remember Goldman's affair. But it is what Dayan who wrote it.
Dayan is not more of a source.
But I spoke about Dayan. I spoke about Dayan. I didn't speak about you and me. And I saw, and he changed his mind. Now, why does Hussein need an international conference? You know the answer exactly as I know. Because our him to develop because he already did it. And publicly, he declared that he knows that we are not going back to the Green Line of 67. So why should we say that the Arabs do not accept territorial compromise? Hussein today accepts, perhaps he doesn't think about the same territorial compromise that I think. That's why we'll have negotiations. And don't send Peres and Rabin. They're going to do it better. I'll speak here. Now, very shortly with regard to the questions. Kula sheli. Rabbi Riskin, yes, I claim Kula sheli. I already said it in my speech. This is Kula sheli, the land of Israel. However, their human existence is there, and I cannot ignore it, and I don't think that you respect the other one and consider him as being created in the image of God when you don't endow him political rights, namely freedom. A human being wants political rights. And I want to tell you that if you would pay me a lot of money and you would like me to be a citizen of Jordan and Syria, and you will tell me you have a democratic situation there, I hope you will not be able to buy me. So there are many Arabs you will not be able to buy. That's why the only solution is metaphysically, historically, religiously. Negotiate, speak with the PLO as long as, one, they don't stop and committed to stop terror. Secondly, they recognize the state of Israel. If they do it, they are not the PLO anymore. If they accept the two demands. So I'm not going to sit with the PLO forever. If they stop being PLO, שערי תשובה אינם ננעלים לעולם. Now, regarding to Gush Etzion, this is the most penetrating question. Certainly, I do not agree for a complete territorial withdrawal. That's why I speak about a territorial compromise. A compromise means that everybody would have to pay a price. Now, don't ask me to draw the exact border because I don't know. I know the principles. I want as much territory, as much land of Israel as possible, as less Arabs as possible, and as much peace as possible. However, I cannot achieve the maximum of the three of them completely. So I have to pay a price, sometimes a painful price. Hussein knows that he will not get Gush Etzion. So his declaration, I believe in the Boston Globe. So why should I remind him about it? And if somebody will ask me, try to draw the line, be consistent. I want to call your attention to the fact that only computers are consistent. Perhaps also Kahana and Charlie Bitton are consistent. But even Rabbi Waldman and myself, we are not consistent. Why? Because in Israel, for instance, the right wing of the Hope can come to the door and ask him, would you give back Jerusalem for peace? Most of the dogs in Israel will say no. So why do you agree to give Jericho for peace? You are not consistent with this, right? So the dog will ask the Hope, would you give back Yamit for peace? No. You are not allowed to withdraw. Why did we protest when we moved from the Rabbi Waldman conclude, but I'll rephrase it differently. I once heard Rabbi Lichtenstein, the head of the yeshiva was there in the lunch booth, who said that there is a difference between the price that a family or a person would agree to pay for having a home and for having a greater home. For having a home, sometimes you pay a lot of price, almost everything. For having a greater home, you don't pay so much price. Sometimes not so many lives. So the difference between Rabbi Waldman and me, according to the way I understand it, is between wanting a greater home and a home. However, I would like you to hear me. However, there is no debate that this is home. And this is the only place where we are challenged by the questions we dealt with. Our loyalty and commitment to the land on the one hand, and to the unique character of the Jewish people on the other. That here is the test, that this is a home. And it is only when you are at home that you can shout one into another, not being afraid from the response of the neighbors. When you are there, you should be very careful. A Jew cannot criticize another Jew. What will they go and say? Here, yes, I know that there is TV, but I once heard Amos Oz who said that one of the main motives of his for being a Zionist because he wanted to be at home and to be able, only when you are at home, you can shout against your wife. So this is the home. Thank you.
We only have about 7 or 8 minutes left, but I will allow for some questions very, very briefly. Yes?
Dr. Ravitzky, I want to ask you a question. Since before 1967, when the Arabs occupied Judea and Samaria and part of Jerusalem, and they were not happy with what they had done, please convince me why your giving my home to them will make them happy.
Thank you. Next. Yes?
I'd like to know what Rabbi Waldman would like to do with the majority of Arabs that do live in Judea and Samaria, and how he would deal with the demographic problems which he has answered.
Thank you. Yosef.
An argument being made that he's gaining some acceptance of that destruction of the Jewish faith, destruction of Jewish lives, is not a transfer of population. The humane solution, such as occurred in other countries after wars, that at least protect people from violence.
Fine. Okay, and the final question, yes? Go ahead, yeah.
Rabbi Waldman, you mentioned, speak up, Ben. Yes, you mentioned that Arabs tend to gravitate toward the more extreme view, line up for the more extreme view. The history of Ishamonim does it not seem that that is the direction that that's going, and not rather than more moderate.
Coming events, we're going to have Mincha after we conclude, and I want to remind you, number one, tomorrow, please, if you can, that's it.
I would ask 2 questions. The first was, why would the Arabs be happy when we give them some territories, and they were not happy before 67? Like a traditional Jew, I'll answer by a question. Why was Sadat happy after Camp David, and he wasn't happy after 67? It means that historical changes and also military victories change the arena, and sometimes you agree to accept a solution that you wouldn't agree 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. And this is happening today. Hopefully, I cannot guarantee, but according to the way I understand the political analysis, this is happening gradually also with Hussein. So the victory in the Six-Day Wars is not a disaster. It could become an important tool for achieving peace. Secondly, we are not going to withdraw from all the territories. However, it can become very fruitful because before 367, certainly there was no way to talk. They believed that they can destroy us. The second question? I don't know the inclination, the spiritual, ideological inclination of most of all the Arabs within the Green Line. I only know that if somebody speaks differently than the PLO, he is killed. So how do you know what they really think and how much really support the PLO and how much do not? I do not have the answer. הקדוש ברוך הוא בוחן כליות ולב. God is supposed to look internally. I know the facts. And the fact is that if I ask you, what is the percentage of the Arabs inside the Green Line who were brought into trial, not convicted, but even brought into trial because of terrorist or some other activity against the security of Israel? Less than 0.5%. This is the only number I know and don't estimate, and this is the way, this is the information according to which we should evaluate and treat them.
First, to relate to the two questions that were put before me, what to do with the Arabs, what to do with the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria. There are 1,300,000 Arabs, and not like the other numbers, but that is also a large amount. About half of these Arabs, half of this number, are Platim, displaced persons, who have been kept in camps by the Arabs, by the Arab leadership. In fact, the state of Israel, the government of Israel, has tried a few times after the Six-Day War to suggest them that the Israeli government will build shikunim for them. Not like these houses in Efrat maybe, but shikunim for those Arabs. They would have agreed, but the terrorist leaders would not allow them. Even before the Six-Day War, with regards to Platim, displaced persons on the west side of the Green Line, there were many times suggestions by the United States, among others, to have these displaced persons settled in sparsely populated Arab lands by international agreement. That's what should be done with these Platim. And that's half of that 1,300,000 Arab population of Judea and Samaria. Now I want to tell you, according to statistics, those statistics that speak about the Arabs becoming 40% or 50% or a majority of the population in Israel in another 30 years, 50 years, those same statistics speak about the Arabs on the west side of the Green Line becoming a majority in another 150 years. So basically we have the same problem even without Judea and Samaria. And the only solution, my dear friends, is Aliyah, which must come about in any case. Aliyah from the Golah and Aliyah Pnimit, hiring the Jewish birth rate. Those are the only solutions, and let's face it. The other question about Gush Emunim. Gush Emunim is not a formal organization. Gush Emunim has differences of opinion within it. But in general, Gush Emunim, how can you just put it on the same line and as they go according to the extreme? The PLO is a terrorist organization. Gush Emunim is an organization which builds settlements in Israel. And more than 100 settlements in Judea and Samaria are witness of that. It is a positive organization
building, creating life. So even if you line up in this way or that way, you're lining up in a positive direction of building and creating life in Israel. And as many of the irreligious people in Israel say, this is the continuance of the pioneering spirit of the Aliyah Shniya in Eretz Yisrael. And two more points. Again, I'll relate to one of the questions put before Dr. Ravitzky. You said, Dr. Ravitzky, that here, Sadat, after the Yom Kippur War, Camp David Accords, was satisfied. Of course he was satisfied. He received everything, every inch. And the precedent that he created was for the Arabs being satisfied only if they received everything, and that's the only thing that will satisfy them, especially after Sadat received everything. And that's the tragedy of the precedent of those agreements. Now, I forgot to mention in my previous remarks the mashal, the example of one who should be willing to give up a finger in if the one who wants to take that finger, his intention is to weaken him in order that he can take all of the arm or all of the body. Why are you comparing them to doctors who want to save us? And secondly, who gave you the right to decide that Hebron is a finger and Shiloh is a finger? They are the heart. They're not fingers. Maybe Tel Aviv is a finger. And therefore, it all depends on our relationship to Eretz Yisrael. Thank you.
The real solution, 1 billion more Jews here in Israel. Go do Filat Mincha.